All right, good evening. Welcome. I'm going to be talking again tonight about the decline of the guitar, or if it's declining, sort of inspired by the Washington Post article in 2017, but also some recent developments with Guitar Center going into bankruptcy. Of course, that could be attributed to coronavirus, but that does seem to be a part of a trend that had been going on. The coronavirus just sort of seemed to make it worse, even though they actually sold a lot of guitars in that period, you know. But there have been a number of quotes. I think even Eric Clapton and Gene Simmons were recently quoted as saying, you know, the music that as we knew it is kind of, maybe it's dying, you know. I think Clapton was kind of kidding, but Gene Simmons wasn't, you know, like, you know. The last good band was the Foo Fighters, and that was 20 years ago. And look at us, we're not getting any, you know, younger. And what's replacing us, you know? The number one job of every generation, people, is to leave it better than you found it and to replace yourself. Think about that. If we didn't do that, then the world, that's what civilization is. We leave it better than we found it, and we replace ourselves with people to keep building on it after we're gone, you know. We're so preoccupied with all the pushiness and the, you know, the politics, you know, that we can't leave it better than we found it, you know. Then someone else will take it for us. But that's an interesting quote, you know, that the last good real rock and roll band was the Foo Fighters, and that was 20 years ago. So last night I talked a bit about the decline of musicality. You know, is this debate about the decline of the guitar really part of the larger discussion about the decline of music itself, you know? And, you know, like I said last night, I don't think music is ever really going to go away all the way. I think it's a physical impulse. But I do think there are kind of cultural trends and that kind of come and go. Just like people, you know, young people don't have a lot of sex anymore compared to 1969, you know. Maybe they were having a more of it in 1969 than normal. It probably goes up and down, but there have been a lot of studies recently. Young people don't have sex anymore, and they don't form relationships. They get married a lot later. We're kind of a more isolated. I guess you know, there are different reasons for that. But I think that's a statistic. And maybe music, you know, maybe music's part of that story. You know, it's part of a change in the culture. And when we talk about, you know, what's happening to the guitars, we could also be talking about, you know, piano sales, and because we all like guitars, we're talking about guitars, but I think the piano sales are way down. I remember when I was a kid, every mall had a music store, and the main instruments they sold were pianos and organs, you know, kind of home pianos and organs too, not all big grand pianos, but, you know, kind of little living room spinets and consoles, and kind of those old kind of chord organs people would buy and have in their houses. And they'd have guitars in there too, and band instruments, but, you know, the piano has declined a lot worse than the guitar, although there's a lot of keyboards. So, but I don't know if that's the same thing. Maybe it's different in a way, but kind of the same thing. I don't know. But tonight I wanted to talk about kind of a second issue that I've always thought about the decline of the guitar, and that is our culture change, where I think in the last 50 years, for a lot of complicated reasons, some good, maybe some not so good, but we've become a much more institutional culture. And rock and roll doesn't thrive on institutions. Rock and roll, you know, it needs a support system to breathe and operate. You know, it needs people, it needs bars, stadiums, amps, but it also needs freedom. And I think to some extent, when I look at the culture of like the late '60s and early '70s and compare it to now, the freedom, the ethos of freedom and expression has changed. And sometimes I call it buckle up for safety. Kids today are raised in a world, or I think they'd be scared to death if they went back to 1969. I've got notes here. You watch the movie Woodstock, and I bet most of you have seen it. Now you try to imagine having Woodstock today. We always kind of nonchalantly the myth of Woodstock. We all love it, and all the music and Jimi Hendrix and Richie Havens, and I love it too. Every time I see that movie, I'm just reminded how awesome that was. Even though it rained, and I'm glad I wasn't in the rain. But I mean, just as a cultural thing. But now think about this today. If they tried to have Woodstock today, at Woodstock, their medical tent was called the Freak Out tent. Okay, they did not have a bunch of medical professionals running around trying to tell them they couldn't do that, because nobody would have cared what they said. But they had a Freak Out tent. They sold their their concession stand was raw veggies out of garbage cans. Can you imagine what the health department would do with that today? And then perhaps one of the most hilarious aspects of that, their security was a bunch of hippies from a commune, Wavy Gravy and the Hog Farm. Now, it's actually funny. The kind of West Coast version of Woodstock was Altamont. Now at Altamont, there was the same kind of thing. They had a Freak Out tent. They had a kind of anything goes atmosphere, some nudity. But, they hired out there the Hells Angels to be security. So I don't even think that would be legal today. Not only would you have everybody, writing about it in the paper, appalled, oh my God, nobody would let their kids go. But I don't think it would be legal. For some reason, I think if you tried to have those festivals today, you would be breaking a lot of laws. I literally think the government would not allow you to have Woodstock today. Government, whether it be federal, state, local, municipal, would not allow you to have, you can't even smoke in a stadium anymore. You look at all those old footages of like Keith Richards, Eric Clapton, they're all dragging on smokes on stage. So there's a different climate for music. Now, I'm not advocating that kind of lifestyle necessarily, but it was, don't kid yourself, that it was part of the freedom of the times, with the excess and the self-destructive elements, but it was also part of the freedom of the time. And rock and roll was about freedom, So I sometimes think, we have a sort of buckle up for safety generation of kids. Our kids are raised in school. For one thing, the schools aren't as good as they were in the 50s and 60s, in my opinion, but also in a weird way, they play a more powerful role in kids. I think kids are in school longer. There's less recess, all that kind of thing. And there's a lot more control of children. Who knows? Maybe that's why so many don't learn to play the guitar. But it's just everything. Car seats. I was watching a movie a while back, Urban Cowboy. I bet a lot of you have seen that with John Travolta. Was it Deborah Winger? It's a pretty good movie. It's kind of a neat movie. It was sort of country. Outlaw country, but kind of a younger version of it, which made it gave it kind of a crossover appeal to rock. I think Joe Walsh had a song in there all night long, but there's some really good music in that. But you just watch that movie and you realize how many felonies did they commit in this movie? There are fights in the parking lot, and it was just a lot looser time. Now, I'm not advocating that, but I am saying that place, McGilly's, was the big bar that, every night, that was sort of the theme of the movie. Every night, all the young people in this area of Texas, they just went into Gillies, and there was a bull in there, and there was kind of a macho culture around the bull, but they would dance, and that's where people met to fall in love and couple, and out of that place, Gillies, came a whole genre of music. It's kind of like it's kind of funny. You look at a lot of how much music has come out of bars. The Cavern Club. I mean, the list could go on. Was it out in California? But like when I watched that, I realized that Gillies would not last today. They would. This culture that is highlighted in this movie wouldn't be around. This place would probably be closed after 2 weeks. And I don't really think that's an exaggeration. So music was part of that culture, and sometimes with its excesses, but when you close all that down, I used to play a lot in clubs and bars. Nothing. I played a fair amount actually. But sometimes I remember when they passed a lot of these non-smoking laws. Now I don't smoke, but it really changed music because people couldn't sit and smoke in a bar anymore. Little things like that actually make a big difference. And unfortunately, they don't have a lot of defenders. There aren't too many people that'll get up there on TV and go, hey, we need to get rid of these, anti-smoking laws because Billy Bob over here wants to smoke a cigarette and drink a beer till 1 a.m. with his buddy Joe. No politician gets up there and says that. But you know what? Those guys were sitting in a bar listening to music, and that's kind of fueled live music. When you kind of shut down that culture, that's one of the reasons we don't have as much live music. And sometimes I think people are buying all these guitars. I bought several guitars in the last several years, and I love it. But sometimes I think we're all kind of imagining ourselves playing live, and the reality is live music is not what it used to be. When I was a kid, there was live. I lived in a kind of wasn't a small town, but it was in Metro Detroit, and it was kind of a small community. I mean, one of those communities where most people knew everybody. And there were 3 or 4 places in that town that had live music with bands, including drums kits, 7 nights a week. Till 2 a.m. 2 a.m. And you'd go in there, and there'd be sometimes some shenanigans in the corner. There might be an occasional fight in the parking lot. The police went in and did a search. Who knows what they'd find? But you know what? But there was music in there. Sometimes it was better than others. But there was actually some pretty good bands that played in those places, especially, And I don't think there's much music in that town at all now. And I've played a lot, and usually if you look, a lot of people that play now, they're often in duos. And the really big bands are usually get corporate gigs and things like that, or there are some places that still have the drum kits and so on. So, but it's not as much as it used to be, for sure. I feel like that's not that controversial of a statement. I know it can depend on where you live, so there's the kind of geography factor. But I do think and even as a parent, think about this. It kind of pains me to say this since I love rock and roll so much, but if you're a parent, would you want your kid to go to Woodstock, a 16-year-old? Hey, Mom, I'm going to Woodstock with my boyfriend. I bet you most of us will go, no way. No way. You look at that old movie, but those kids weren't all that supervised. Well, the other weird thing is a lot of them, it was sort of before the culture of divorce and single mothers, and those kids that actually came from a pretty great country and with a pretty strong society for all its problems. But think about that. So we have today this kind of buckle up for safety mindset, and it's hard. It's hard for music to flourish in that. Yeah, and we could have like after school lessons. And I think that's what when people think of music today, they think of like, well, we'll get Johnny after school lessons, and I'm not cutting out music lessons. I think that's a great thing to do, but we'll get little Billy after school lessons, and have him sing in the choir. And by the way, schools don't have as much choir. I should look back. I used to not think so, but as I've gotten older, I've realized how much I learned in choir and band about. Like I'm a good sight reader, actually, and because I play the piano. But I learned a lot about like singing. And I think a lot of people used to learn singing in church too. A lot of the African American music that's so great. A lot of those artists came out of church when they were kids. That's where they learned to sing, in gospel. But we have like after school lessons, or band camp. All those are kind of safe, or even like rock camp, for the kids, fantasy rock camp, but it's all pretty supervised. And I hate to say it, but the great music of rock and roll was amateur in the sense that it was you have to learn an instrument, you have to love it, and a lot of those artists that we all love played hours and hours, and often they were playing hours and hours in bars, clubs, after school lessons that were kind of in an adult structure didn't do that. Like some sort of a after school program that was considered a extracurricular activity. That's not what makes great musicians. It definitely, it's not a bad thing to do, but if that chokes out, the next John Lennon, who was always fighting in school, getting in trouble in school, and playing guitar all the time. He wasn't like having a nice half-hour lesson after school. He was playing all the time. I'm not advocating that for everybody, but I think there was more of a social safety net. Then people, people, there were jobs around, and I guess people didn't school, but school has really become a tracking system. People are so afraid their kids are going to fall off that rail of the educational system, and I do think that makes it hard to have good music in some ways. There's not that there's good music that doesn't come out of that, and I know there are a lot of, but I just think you watch any of those old concert movies and you realize this couldn't happen today. Not only because the culture is different or times have changed, but it literally couldn't happen today. It would literally be like this concert in its entirety would be against the law. And it would be on CNN. There would be experts of every stripe denouncing it, and it would, you'd take some of the greatest concerts in rock and roll history, and there'd be a bunch of, shingle carrying, experts on TV saying how horrible we just can't have this, and they'd shut it down, and and it would be a health thing, but the music would be a collateral damage, because the music was really part of that, that scene. I hate to say it, but music does have a cultural context. In Frank Sinatra's time, it was the cocktail and the martini. And that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy Frank Sinatra without being a Dean Martini style alcoholic or something. But that was part of that culture, and and I think the culture of the '60s had its ethos. And I actually think a lot of the culture that surrounded rock and roll would literally be against the law, including like a lot of the things that are live music. Live music would in many ways be illegal. Or at least the settings that live music happened in back then. And unfortunately, I don't. I think the older generations aging out, they still kind of get grandfathered in, and they have their concerts. But I don't think the young people have really come up with much. They do have some of these festivals, and I don't know that much about them. But you notice it's interesting. Some of these festivals, it's a way to kind of bring in several bands, many bands, but that's the only way, and like have people there for a longer period. That's the only way I think you can really get a lot of people together. I think some of the younger bands, they can't fill a dome stadium for one night, with 80,000 people like the Stones could and still do. And that's not because there aren't good bands that are younger, but I think it's a culture change. Like I think sometimes I think us old people are kind of grandfathered in, or we're still kind of going, but the rules have changed for younger people. And but buckle up for safety. I think it's good. No one's denouncing safety. No one's advocating an excessive lifestyle. But if you think about it, some of the institutionalization that we've imposed on our society, especially young people, a byproduct of that might be that it hurts creativity. There's been an awful lot of creativity that's come out of life in all its complexity, including, but people making mistakes, doing whatever. But when you have a sort of a world where all that's sort of laid out, I think it hurts creativity. I really do, and it's a shame. So I'm not trying to get, I don't want to be political. I don't consider myself a political person, but and I don't want to sound like an old man that's kind of grumping about. Those are just some observations I have. Buckle up for safety. Every minute of a kid's day has to have adult supervision. All those things hurt music. If you care about music, that hurts music, and trying to replace it with an after-school lesson for half an hour is not going to cut it. Because great music is organic. It grows free, so. Well, that was my second point. So on the first night, I talked about musicality. Does music itself, kind of in decline, and the guitar is part of that. And tonight I kind of talked about institutionalization in the way that a lot of our laws, policies, in the culture we have, particularly with young people, has changed in ways that I think there are some good things about. Probably there's some bad things about the way things used to be, but it is hard for music to flourish in a buckle up for safety, adult supervision world all the time. And think about that. What's your priority?